Welcome, everyone, to the SA Authors podcast series with me, Mdu Ntuli. Today, it is a pleasure. I am thrilled to be speaking to the amazing South African author, Kurt Ellis, on his incredible, spectacular, really spellbinding recent novel, In the Midst of Wolves. Now, before I let Kurt introduce himself a bit further, I'll just like to say a few things about him. So Kurt is the 2001 winner of the Harry Oppenheimer Creative Writing Award. Also, Kurt is the author of By Any Means, which he published in 2014, and also was nominated for the Etisalat Literary Award in 2015. Also, Ellis is also a father of two children, two beautiful children, Gabriel and Caleb. He's a husband to Melanie, to whom the book is dedicated. Kurt currently is enrolled in the Creative Writing Master's Program at the University of Witwatersrand, WITS, and he lives in Johannesburg with his wife and daughter and son. So before I let Kurt speak a little bit further about the book and we delve into the book, In the Midst of Wolves, let me just read a little bit and tell you a little bit about the book. So Nick Creed, who's the main character in the novel, is an expert criminal profiler. He hunts down human monsters for a living. Back in South Africa, after working with the FBI, he is haunted by his past mistakes, including the death of his fiancée. When a young woman is murdered and dismembered in her Johannesburg apartment, Creed's longtime friend and head of the South African Police Service's Investigative Psychological Unit, Major Eli Grey, enlists his help in investigating the murder, which is an attempt to save the self-destructing Creed from himself. But not all the unit's members welcome his involvement, and there are those intent on exposing his secrets while the murder is being solved. The young woman's community are convinced she was the victim of a witch called Nomthakathi. But Creed's hunch points to an angry ex-boyfriend who, or what, is really behind the murder. Could it be Nomthakathi, who believes Nick Creed is uSathane? In the Midst of Wolves is a dark psychological thriller about metaphorical demons from the past and the living monsters who target the innocent. Wow, that was a mouthful.
That was awesome.
Thank you. Kurt, welcome and congratulations on this amazing, really spellbinding and I think addictive novel. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Mdu. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yes, no, I really did enjoy it. It took me about 2 or 3 days because I had to work. So it took me about 3 days to read the book, but it's a page turner. It's once you start, it's one of those books that grabs you. And it was an amazing experience. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much
Yes.
for your kind words. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
And so firstly, the characters, one of the things I would like to say is that the characters really are realistically portrayed, but yet they have complications, yet they are relatable. Particularly the main character, Nicholas Creed, is very consuming to the mind's reader, perhaps even addictive. So I found him to be realistically constructed. He's flawed, yet he's likable and an unlikely hero. And on part 1, you start the book with a quote from German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. And he says, quote, "Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process, he does not become a monster." And so that's an interesting way to start the book. And then also on page 20, you reiterate this, page 20, which is chapter 3. You use a quote, which is a Latin quote. So when you're describing some of the tattoos on Nick's body, you use the proverb, the Latin proverb, homo homini lupus, which means man is wolf to man. And this highlights also the theme in the novel. So please tell us, let me let you speak. Please tell us about In the Midst of Wolves. What inspired the novel and what's your intention for writing it the way you wrote it?
Wow. Well, actually, I don't think I can do any better than what you just did. You described it perfectly. In the Midst of Wolves is a dark psychological thriller. My main character is a character named Nicholas Creed, who's a South African policeman, and also a criminal profiler. And his backstory is that he moved over to the United States as part of an exchange program between the FBI and the SAPS. And through his talent as a criminal profiler, he gains he gains a level of fame. Becomes like a D-list celebrity, and he had always been a confident person. But with this fame, he became arrogant and he became cocky, and he made a mistake, and while profiling a serial killer, and that mistake led to the death of his fiancée. And Creed never knew failure before that moment. And with this failure, his entire world came crashing down around him. And he gets sent back to South Africa under a cloud of controversy. I'm not going to tell you what the controversy specifically is. Well, because you've read the book.
Yes.
But I'm going to leave that a bit vague for now.
Yes.
But he comes back to South Africa a broken man. And that's when we meet him. He's a drug addict. He's an alcoholic. He's living a debaucherous life. He's hurting himself intentionally because he wants to feel the pain. He wants to suffer. He wants to feel a painful, slow death because of his failure and what he did. And the only person, well, not the only person, but one of the biggest people in his life is his best friend, Major Eli Grey, who's a member or the leader or the head of a elite unit within the SAPS. And in Eli's mind, the best way to help recover is to get him back to do what he does best, which is why he wants Creed to consult with him on this case. As you mentioned, Lorraine Cinnamon is a character. She's murdered at the start of the book. Her body is mutilated, and there's whispers within the SAPS that this could be a Mutsi killing. And it's, for me, what I wanted to do was sort of compare the internal battles that Creed is facing on a daily basis, fighting these demons that are literally consuming him from the inside like a cancer, while still trying to, battle potentially real external demons or external monsters within the book. And what inspired me to write it in the first place, though, was it was almost like a perfect storm of inspiration. The first thing was I read a novel by a renowned international crime writer, one of the biggest in the business. And, their novel was set in the UK, but it involved Mutsi murders. It involved South Africa. And it was a brilliant book. I enjoyed it. But at the same time, I felt like, why is this British writer writing a South African story? This is our story. This is an African story. We should be the ones selling it. And that's what I wanted to do. And then at the same time, around the same period, I watched a documentary which spoke about the murders of people with albinism in Tanzania and Burundi for the use of their body parts in Muti. And it shook me, it pulled me. And that's why I decided to sort of use that as the plot for my story, because I wanted to shine a light upon it. And I wanted to, just draw some attention to it. So that was the inspiration behind it. The reason I also wrote it the way I wrote it was I wanted to be careful as well not to. What I found is, especially when people use or bring up Mutsi and traditional beliefs in novels, is that they either have two approaches. They either ridicule it, or they say that the supernatural aspects of it is real. Now, I didn't want to do either of that. So what I tried to do was compare or ask the question, why is African traditional beliefs so easily shunned, and yet Western beliefs, Western religion is so easily accepted? So, I put that question in the book. I draw a lot of parallels between the two. And I thought, my job is to ask the question. The reader can come up with their own answers. So,
wow. And then Kurt, how did the character of Nicholas Creed come to you? How did you realize him?
wow, Nick has been with me for like 20 years. I swear, he's been with me. It's from a young age. I used to love puzzles, and when I got into reading, the first the books I was drawn to was mystery books, the whodunits and crime thrillers eventually, and the darker the better. And what I think happened was subconsciously I extracted little atoms from the different books I was reading, and they slowly began to morph and form and combine to create this character of Nick Creed, who before I wrote in the Mr. Wolves, I was sitting in the dark corner of my psyche, patiently waiting for me to to introduce him to the world. And that's how he formed initially. And for me as well, his personality. What I wanted to do with Nick as well was draw attention to depression, because when I wrote the first draft of the manuscript, I was going through the darkest period of my life. My first book was published, and by any means, it was very well received critically and was nominated for awards, but it just didn't sell as well as I hoped it would. And around the same time, I had lost my job. The bank had repossessed my home, my car. I was sleeping on couches, going from friend to friend, cousin to cousin, just trying to get by. And I was at the lowest of the low, and I was having very dark thoughts. And these are the same thoughts that Creed is having. And what I find as being a colored male, a male of color, is that a lot of men, black men, men of color, are ashamed of depression. It's still shunned, and it's still looked upon as negatively. And for me, depression is no different to diabetes or cancer. It's an illness. It's a chemical imbalance, and you shouldn't be ashamed of it. And with the character of Creed, that I use his depression as a way of putting it into the spotlight, saying yes, men can get depressed, and there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, no, Creed has been with me for a long, long time. As he was first introduced in my first novel, very briefly, by any means. He's mentioned in passing, his backstory is mentioned in passing, because what I love to do as well is drop little, what I like to say, seeds in my novels for future novels and for different novels. So, if almost like Easter eggs. So if somebody reads By Any Means and it goes back to, if somebody reads in the Mr. Wolves and it goes back to By Any Means, the name Nicholas Creed will pop out to them. It'll be like a wonderful Easter egg surprise.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So Kurt, how long did it take you to write the novel? And also, when you started writing it, did you envision the end when you started writing it, or did it evolve through the process?
Well, my writing approach is a little bit unusual, because when I start a new novel, the first thing I have in mind is actually the ending. That's what I start with, is the ending. This is where I want the story to end up, and then I work my way back to how did we get here. And then when I get to the beginning, I use very formulaic, create a step-by-step guide. I almost say like giving directions, a step-by-step, a scene-by-scene description of what's going to happen, how my characters are going to get from point A to point B. And then I start writing. And these characters who are given specific directions to, 9 times out of 10, they don't obey my directions. They just go off on their own tangent. They do not follow my plan. And I feel that, I view myself when I'm writing not as a creator, but as an observer. And a reporter, like a documentary photographer. I'm watching, I'm observing, I'm reporting, but I'm not interfering. I'm allowing my characters to, go on their own journey. And I'm lucky that 9 times out of 10, they end up where I want them to end up. Although the route they took is completely different to my own, And, I think that actually adds more substance and realism to my characters, where, they almost talk back to me and say, Kurt, I wouldn't do this. If this was to happen to me, this is how I would respond. and I just allowed him to do that. But with in the Mr. Wolves, the challenge here was, for me, I see it as the very least the first book in a trilogy. So the ending I started with is the ending of this book, as well as the ending of potentially a trilogy. So I needed to make sure that everything lines up. You know, everything. I needed to keep both those elements in mind, you know, when writing in the Mr. Wolves.
Mm. Wow. And then my next question, Kurt, is, you know, the theme of monsters comes up throughout the novel, throughout the story. And there are several monsters that you mentioned. So there are actual monsters, there are criminal monsters, there are apartheid monsters, there are sadistic monsters. And, you know, as I was reading the novel, there's a phrase, um, a phrase that I often think about when I think about this country, and that is, the chickens will always come home to roost. And I always think about that. And particularly when I was reading in chapter 43, when you're talking about Nick's father and his depression and his disappointment, because Nick's father in the novel, he was one of the struggle icons. He was one of the freedom fighters. And then he comes back to South Africa after being in exile, and his disappointment with his comrades who are now in powerful positions in parliament, and they've forgotten him, and his depression and his disappointment with that. Do you think a lot of people in this country are experiencing that similar anger as Kurt's father in the novel is experiencing, that disappointment with the government, with our heroes?
We are, to be honest. I think we do. Well, that's a good question. Yeah, no, I think many of us would say yes. I couldn't help but think of people like Solomon Mahlangu and Ashley Creel and Chris Hani, Steve Biko, and you know, and try to imagine what would they think and what would they say based on what they're seeing at the moment, where we've still got an unemployment rate of over 40%, where you know our poverty rate is way too high, and I personally find it amazing, disgusting that we can have like a handful of, you know, almost oligarchs that are, you know, making or living a ridiculously wealthy lifestyle when we have such an abundance of people, you know, in poverty and struggling to get by. And, you know, for me personally, I feel, yes, I feel a bit betrayed. I feel that, you know, the dream that was sold to me, the promise that was made to me as a South African, as a colored South African, has not been fulfilled by the people that we've put into power. And I think that this is a feeling that many South Africans have across the racial divide, across the political divide, because nobody can say, irrespective of which party you vote for, which philosophy you align yourself with, nobody can say that we are doing as South Africans the best we can do, because we're not. So this is a country of huge potential, of huge possibilities, and we are not tapping into it. So, you know, in the character of Gabriel Creed, Nick's father, you know, he represents that disappointment, that hurt, that pain of you know, sacrificing your life and giving, or sacrificing your family, going into exile, risking your life, taking lives in order to fight for a better future for all, and yet that promise is not being fulfilled.
Wow. Yeah, for me, that was one of the themes in the novel that touched me, because I think there's a lot happening in this country at the moment, actually, that makes me think maybe the chickens are starting to roost. Things are starting to unravel. Well,
Hopefully.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But it is inevitable, I think. It is inevitable. And then to move on, again, sticking with the theme of monsters. So monster hunters, like police officers, like Nick Creed, like Major Gray, like Detective Mayer, and other characters in the novel that you touch on, such as like the journalist Tracy Wilson. All of them have an inner monster that they have to deal with. Especially, there's a character in the book called Professor Buthelezi. And I won't tell the reader much about him, but it will be a surprise when they get to the end of the novel and what becomes of him. Do you think each of us have an inner monster, an inner wolf that we have to manage, that we have to keep at bay, that perhaps we even have to embrace?
An inner wolf, no, actually. Um, I actually think I'm thinking of a Native American fable, an original, a true American fable, a parable, where it goes, a old Cherokee man is talking to his grandson and says to him, you know, I have got two wolves inside me, and they are fighting. The one wolf is evil. This wolf is the wolf. This wolf is greed. This wolf is envy. This wolf is anger. This wolf is hatred. This wolf is, you know, despair. And the second wolf is a good wolf. This wolf is love. This wolf is joy. This wolf is empathy, kindness, peace, and forgiveness. And they are fighting within me, and it's a vicious, brutal fight. And they're also fighting within you, and they're fighting within every single human being. And the grandson thinks about this, and then he says, and then he asks, so which wolf wins? And the old man says, the wolf that wins is the wolf that we feed. So, you know, I personally believe that 100%. I think that we as human beings just need to make sure that we keep feeding the right wolf, the good wolf, in order for us to achieve our full potential and for us to live a happy life. Because at the end of the day, that's all we want to be. That's all we need to be, is to be happy.
Yes, I agree. And that's an interesting point that you've mentioned, the good wolf and the bad wolf. Because in the novel, Nick seems to have both. And sometimes he feeds the bad wolf. But then there's one particular instant in the novel where he seems to be feeding the good wolf. And that, so his relationship with Carly. So he has a neighbor. So Nick has a neighbor that beats his wife. And then he helps the neighbor stand up to her abusive husband. And why did you choose to include this part in the novel? Was it about showing another type of monster, a man who beats his wife and his daughter? Or did you want to focus in exactly what you've been saying, that Nick has a good side? He has a good wolf in him. Why did you choose to include this particular part in the novel?
You are 100% correct. That was the purpose of introducing the character of Carly. That what I wanted, Carly represented Creed finally giving that good wolf within him some nourishment. Because prior to that, that bad wolf, that evil wolf was winning. You know, he was wallowing in despair, in slowly and intentionally hurting himself. And then along comes this external character, Carly, who, if Nick had turned a blind eye to what was happening to her, wouldn't have changed his life in one bit, you know. But he chose not to. He chose to feed a good wolf, and he chose to come to her aid and stand up for her. And you know, for me, that incident is like the catalyst for Creed to then start stepping out of his depression, as to start caring about what happened with Lorenz and Amani at the beginning of the novel, to start caring about hunting down Nomtakati. And yeah, her purpose there was to, you know, to help Creed, yeah, to feed that good wolf. But more than that, besides him coming to her aid, she came to his aid as well. I think we need to acknowledge that Collie saved Nick, perhaps even more than he saved her. And regarding the spousal abuse that takes place with her parents, it's also something that I feel, just like I wanted to shine a spotlight on, the murders of people with albinism for Muti. Yeah, I think South Africa, we do have a plague, an illness in this country that is gender-based violence. And, you know, eh, I always want to write realistic novels. You know, they are fiction, but I want to be as realistic as possible. And the sad truth is, having a neighbor in South Africa that abuses his wife and his kids is more realistic than one where they don't. And I think that is something that we as South Africans all need to take responsibility for and address.
Absolutely. Yes. But yeah, sometimes it's scary to get involved in such situations. But you touched on
It
something that
is.
you touched on a very important point, that Nick and Carly in the novel, in a way, heal each other, or helps heal Nick in some kind of way. And so on page 204, which is chapter 63, Nick is reflecting on this because now Carly has been visiting him more and more often. And so he says, that girl was getting far too comfortable in his house. But he had to admit that he liked knowing there was someone else around. He didn't want to talk to her or see her, but just knowing she was there somewhere meant that he wasn't alone. I found that very powerful. Wow. Thank you for that. And then now I want to talk to the character of Reggie and the moody aspect of the novel. So on chapter 53, Reggie, who is on the run from the police for Lorraine's murder, the young woman that has been murdered at the beginning of the novel, as well as other crimes. So he visits the witch, Nomtagati. Now, the way you describe this scene when he's with Nomtagati is so vivid, and Nomtagati and her monsters around her. The way you describe it is so vivid and so realistic that it did scare me in the novel when I was reading that part. It really was scary. So, what kind of research did you do in order to get this right and authentic as you did in the novel? Because you really did a good job in how you portrayed this.
Sure. I did quite a bit of research. The challenge, though, was trying to find academic material about traditional African practices. There's not much out there. There's not much out there. So what I did find, I then tried to pad with some conversations and interviews and chats with my friends, particularly a friend of mine named Malungelo and his grandmother, who was, it's a shame because I mean she gave me, I swear, close to like the equivalent to 1,000 pages of information and stories and folk tales and just what happened to her growing up and these almost like ghost stories and yet as a writer I have to try and condense that so much information into like a page or two um, of information in the book because it is a work of fiction. And what I also discovered as well, what I did as well was when the academic information I had didn't coincide with the information I got from friends and and colleagues and people that I interviewed, I tended to go with the layman more because I'm not writing the story for academics. I'm not writing an academic paper. As much as I want academics to buy it, I'm writing for the layman, for the average reader. So I tended to side with them when it came to information. You know, and the non-correlation between academic and the layman is not, I can say that it's not limited to traditional African beliefs. I mean, we have the same situation in Western beliefs in Christianity. For example, if I were to ask the average Christian person how many of each animal did Noah take on the ark, 9 times out of 10, most people will say 2 of each animal because that's how it is. That's how the song goes. That's how we were taught. But if you look at the Bible says 2 of every unclean animal and 7 of every clean animal. Now, most people don't know this. And if I were to write this in a book and say, somehow include the Noah's Ark story in the book and say, he took 7 of every clean animal, this will cause the reader to be a bit confused because this is not what they know, this is not what they understand. So in terms of the way I describe Nomsakati and her situation and environment is based on not necessarily what the academic information I gathered, but from the layperson's information that they told me. And another thing I did was when I was growing up, we had a neighbor in my community, and the word on the street was that she was an Umtakati. She was a witch. And she also, and this was my next door neighbor, and her grandson, that was a friend of mine. And I, on a handful of occasions, I went over to their house and was playing. I would go there to play TV games because he had a Sega machine. Sega Golden China machine. But no, I'd sit in that house and then just slowly my imagination would run wild. And every little noise was, is that a tokolosh? Every little smell I would pick up was that literally making something there, you know, and I would be scared. I would be terrified. So when I wrote the Nomtakati scenes, I wanted to create the scenes. I wanted to recreate that feeling I had while I was there sitting in the neighbor's house. And, hopefully, based on what you said, I achieved that. I feel it when I read it. I still get goosebumps reading it. It terrifies me, which is a good thing.
Yes, no, you did achieve that. But that's good. It draws you in, and you become part of, and especially the way you described Reggie's fear of Nomtarati herself and her monsters around her. That was very, very nicely done. And then now, Kurt, race comes into the novel. It's inconspicuous, but when it does come up, it's real. You feel that, okay, this is a racial situation. So, for example, on page 107, there's an argument between Steenkamp and Zwane. So they had just been interviewing some suspects or looking for a suspect in Soweto. And then, so they get in the car. And so you say, as they slammed the doors behind them, Steenkamp hissed, "You know what? I'm sick and tired of this crap." "What crap?" Mayer responded. "This crap." He pointed outside the window. "That woman telling us we're harassing her, telling us we must go harass the white people. Why must it always be about race with you people?" "You people?" Zwane spoke up from the back seat. "Yes, you people," he repeated. "Apartheid is long gone. It's been over 20 years now. Bloody hell. But why you still holding that racism card? Every time you'll play it, every time. When will you people stop making everything about race?" "When?" Zwane repeated. "I'll tell you when. When I can walk down the street and a white woman doesn't suddenly cross the road for no reason at all, but because I'm black. Or when I can walk through the mall and those same women don't suddenly hold their bags tighter like I'm a thief. Or when I can go into a shop and the shop owner stops following me around. Then it will stop being about race. Until you know that feeling, Steenkamp, it will always be about race." Wow. Kurt, was this cathartic for you when you were writing these particular portions in the novel about race? Because I know you come from Durban, which is a very racially divided city. I'm also from Durban, so I know the experience. So was that experience that you were releasing in the novel through these chapters about race?
Look, again, even though I do write fiction, I write fiction about real people. And for me to pretend that racism doesn't or race issues doesn't shape people's thinking, then I think I'd be failing as a writer. My job as a writer, I believe, is to hold up a mirror to society and say, no, this is the world we live in. I'm not creating this world. I'm showing you what we are living in. And for me not to include conflicts of race, which we see on a daily basis. We experience it on a daily basis. We experience it in our interactions. And for me to pretend that people don't see race would be wrong. The reason, I have this conflict between Steenkamp and Zwane is to show or to represent the conflict and the conversations most of us have on a daily basis. It's a conversation that we must have. We cannot pretend that racism doesn't exist. It does exist. You mentioned Zwane, you mentioned Steenkamp talking about how apartheid's been over for 20 years, but we still feel the impact of apartheid on a daily basis. I mean, it's like being shackled to a tombstone. It might be dead, but it still haunts us. And we see it in the disparity in the wealth gap between people of color, black people, and white people. We see it in when we look at businesses. Who are the people that are in control? Who are the managers? Who are the owners? We see it on a daily basis. We don't even have to go that deep. We just need to walk onto the streets and see who's living where and how are they surviving. So for me, I think the most important thing for me to do as a writer is to simply hold up a mirror, to do my best, not to get into a soapbox and preach about it, but to hold up a mirror and say, this is the society we live in. These characters are real characters, and to try to get the reader to maybe see a bit of themselves, or to see other people that they might recognize within my characters. And yeah, hopefully I've achieved that.
And then Kurt, so as a writer, as you've explained, many of us are raced people. Race has been imposed on us. So as Kurt, do you find that as a writer, this is your space to just be Kurt without the social labels and attachments, to just be you and to express you without any label?
But not really, because Kurt is a label. That's me. I'm not going to say this. Growing up, every single interaction I've had influences the person I am and the rights that I am. For example, I talk about I came from a very poor background. I know how to steal electricity. I knew that as I wasn't even a teenager yet, and I could illegally connect electricity. I had a very tough background growing up, but I'm thankful for every minute of that, because that's molded me into the person, into the writer I am. But I don't feel it's right for me to then shuffle off these labels of who I am as a writer. They need to influence, or they do influence, the words I choose, the stories I choose to tell, and who I choose to tell these stories about. Because I feel that not enough representation is given to certain people in our society, certain people that we live with. And when they are represented with negative stereotypes. And, I don't think that's right. Nick Creed, for example, is a colored character. He's a hero. He's the hero of the story. He's not how most colored people are represented in other works of fiction. I have a homosexual private investigator who's happily married. That's not how they are represented. That's not how gay people are represented in most of our fiction. I wanted to destroy the stereotype wherever possible. And I do feel, as a writer, especially as a writer of color, I don't have that luxury of being able to say, I don't have a responsibility to other people who might not necessarily have a voice in mainstream literature. I feel I'm obligated to try and give them a voice wherever possible.
Yeah, you're right. Yes. And the way, yes, you've given life and you've given background to characters who normally would not be given the platform to show them as human and to show them as complex. Usually such characters would be represented in a caricature way, in a stereotypical way, but you've given them depth and sensitivity.
100%.
Absolutely. So I agree with you on that. And then I want us to move on to talk about love, Kurt. So I don't want to
Sure.
finish the conversation without talking about love, because I believe in love. I think love is a very, very important thing. I think it's in everything that we do. But in the novel, love is represented in a way that is, some people in a distorted way. Some people have a very bad relationship with love. Nick, obviously, has a very painful relationship with love. His fiancée was murdered. Eli Grey, Major Grey, Nick's friend, also has had a painful relationship with love. His fiancée was also murdered. Steenkamp, who is married, has an abusive relationship with his wife. Um, but Zwane seems to be the only person, Detective Zwane seems to be, I think, the only person who has a healthy relationship with love. Maya, Detective Maya, who's lonely, um, is also, he reflects on this in the book when they've just done a raid in Soweto and there was a shootout. So they get back to the station and Zwane says, oh, I need to call my wife to tell her that I'm okay. And then Maya reflects on this and he thinks, I'm alone. I don't have anyone to call. What are you saying about love in this novel?
Uh, to be honest, love actually didn't really play a theme in my thinking when I was writing the novel. And the reason I'm laughing is because, when I was writing this, and it occurred to me, all these characters have got very bad relationships. That's not right. And that's why I made a conscious effort to make Zwane's marriage a strong, positive marriage. It's easy in a fantastic relationship with his wife. Because no, I saw that as well. I picked that up, that all these characters are in miserable relationships. So I gave Zwane a happy marriage. I gave my private investigator Peter, which appears briefly in the novel. He's also happily married. But for me, more importantly, I didn't really use love as a theme, but I used relationships as a theme as a whole. Because Cree's relationship with Collie, that's a love relationship. That's almost a paternal relationship. Cree's relationship with Eli, that's also love. That's a fraternal love. That's a brotherly love. And that those were. I didn't really want to focus on a romantic love because I also feel that that would have been expected, especially for my main character to have a romantic love interest in the novel, and I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do the expected. I wanted to keep this novel as surprising and shocking as possible. So that's why I consciously chose not to give Creed a love interest in the novel, in this specific novel. So yeah.
All right, yes. I noticed I was also expecting that someone would show up and become a love interest. But you portrayed love, romantic love. I mean, you sort of touched on it. One of the people in the station, the public relations officer, has a crush on Major Grey, but you don't really go much into that. It's sort of mentioned in conversations, but you don't go much into that. So, will there be? We have to end off. Will there be a continuation of Nick Creed? So, in your acknowledgements at the end, you sort of kind of mention um, that you hope that there will be a continuation of Creed. Will there be a continuation, and does he find peace in his life, or will we find out in the next novel?
I hope there's a continuation. It's as I said earlier, in my mind, In the Mist of Wolves is the first of a three book series, at least, of a trilogy. And that's how I wrote it. Although if nothing else was published after In the Mist of Wolves, the reader of In the Mist of Wolves will still have a happy, peaceful resolution. But, I have finished a manuscript for a sequel in Sheep's Clothing. I'm not going to give you too much away whether or not Creed does find peace in there. I can tell you, though, that it is, wow. You will be, again, I planted some beautiful seeds in the Mr. Wolves that come to fruition in, the later novel. So hopefully, whether or not that book is published is based on how well this book does. But, I hope to God and I pray every day that you guys get to see it, because you will absolutely love it.
Wow. I loved it. I think it's a masterpiece and very addictive. That's the word that keeps coming to mind. The moment and also the chapters are very short. It's not overburdened by long chapters. Before you know it, the chapter is over and then it's next. So they fall into each other very effortlessly, and they just take you into this world. And even now, I'm still thinking about it, and you wonder what the characters are going through. You wonder what happens. So at the end of the book, I'm wondering, so what happens to Major Mayer, to Detective Mayer and the journalist? Because at the end, they sort of have some kind of relationship going. So I'm wondering about that. What happens to Steenkamp and his wife? So, wow, well done.
Thank you so
I
much.
really enjoyed it.
And that was my intention. That was my intention to, I wanted these characters to become like friends to the readers, where you want to continue having a relationship with them. So I'm happy, I'm happy you want to know more.
Yes, so I cannot wait for the sequel. As soon as it's out, I'll get it, and we'll do another interview, another conversation again. I'm sure it'll be as spectacular and as spellbinding as In the Mist of Wolves. Kurt, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mdu. I really, really appreciate it. This was perhaps one of my best interviews ever. Absolutely loved it. Thank you so much. I've had it lots.
Thank you. In the Mist of Wolves by Kurt Ellis. It's available in all bookstores in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mdu.